It's wonderful to be with you all. Um, and I'm going to start with a song um, uh, to open this as a space where we can welcome all the parts of ourselves um, and where we can welcome everybody. And also a space where we can try to set aside for this time together some of the language that tends to be dehumanizing to fat folks, which means that before I sing, I'll just set a couple of uh, boundaries for this space, which is that this is going to be a space where we are not going to assume that it's better to be thin than to be fat. And I also invite you um, to see if there are words that you can use to talk about fat people or people in larger bodies that are less stigmatizing than some of the other words that we often use, including the word overweight, which assumes that there is some weight that we ought to be and that we are somehow out of that norm. As well as the word obese or obesity, which is a medical term. So I'm just going to use this song as a way of welcoming us to set those boundaries. And I'm happy when we have time for questions to answer any questions you might have about those. So I'm putting the lyrics to this song that some of you may know, a song by Libby Roderick, in the chat. How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that our loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that our loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that our loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. How deeply you're connected to my soul. So I want to tell you a little bit. I know some of you are very familiar and have heard this very story that I'm about to tell many times. But for those of you who are new to to my work and to the work of Fat Torah, the project that I started, this story with you about how it all got started. So I am someone who's been involved in fat activism for a little over 30 years now. And you'll hear me use, as you already have, you'll hear me use the word fat as a morally neutral descriptor of a particular body size and type in the beautiful, diverse spectrum of human bodies. And that's something that's not unique to me. It's something that fat activists in the US certainly have been doing since the late 1960s. And so that's one thing to know, is that I come to this work really from a lineage of fat activism, but I had really kept my fat activism and my rabbinate and my Torah teaching quite separate from one another, with the exception of a few little tidbits here and there, a blog post or two over the years. And then a little over 5 years ago, it was not Shavuot, it was Chanukah, so 5.5 years ago, and I was at my daughter's Hanukkah party for her gan, for her preschool. And there we were, and the first activity that these 3 and 4 and 5 year olds were going to be engaging in was dancing, singing and dancing. And I'm someone who's really blessed in my own relationship with my body that I'm very happy dancing in public generally. But at the time, a little over 5.5 years ago, I was also 39 weeks pregnant, and I didn't really feel like I could dance as my daughter clearly wanted me to. And I realized that I had like this whole dialogue going on in my head that was sort of surprising me as someone who generally over the last 30 years has learned to be as it changes in all kinds of ways. So I was a little surprised to find that I had this sort of stormy dialogue going on inside my head where one voice was saying, well, I hope everyone here knows that I'm pregnant and that's why I'm not dancing. And then another voice that was like, that's kind of an ableist thing to say to yourself. Like, shouldn't anybody be able to show up in whatever space they're in and move however they can or feel like moving in the moment? And then another voice that said, well, why do you assume that people are judging you? And another voice came back and said, because people are constantly judging fat people's bodies. So all of this is going on internally. Thankfully, we had a chance to take a break from the dancing so that we could eat sufgan. Uh, and so everyone away and enjoying themselves until the back, unless you've gotten to was horrified. I was horrified. You're not hearing me clearly? I'm getting a message that you're not hearing me clearly. Yeah?
You were sort of going in
Okay.
and out for a little bit.
Let's see.
You're, yeah.
I'm going in and out.
I think you're a little bit frozen too, it
Let me
looks
see
like.
if there's anything I can do about that.
Oh, are you still with us?
Any better? Is that better?
Say a little bit more.
Let's see. So there, did you hear the part? Did you hear the punchline about the guy saying, "Let's all get back to dancing unless you've gotten too fat from those sufganiyot"?
I don't think so.
You're shaking your head because you didn't hear the punchline, or you're shaking your
Oh,
head because you can't hear me.
I don't think we heard the punchline, if I'm correct. I'm sorry. I
Oh,
was concentrating.
okay,
We did.
okay.
I
How's the
think it's,
sound now?
yeah, I think it's better. Thank you.
Great. All right, I'm backing up in the story. So we took a break from dancing to eat sufganiyot, and I thought that was a welcome thing since I didn't feel like dancing. And then the guy who was leading the music said, "All right, let's all get back to dancing, unless you've gotten too fat from those sufganiyot." So I was appalled for a number of reasons. First of all, we know that children of that age, 3 and 4 and 5, are already starting to judge their own and and everyone else's bodies as good and bad based on their size. We know that that can be a big contributing factor to eating disorders. One of which can be, one of the deadliest mental health issues that we know of and that we measure. So I was appalled that he would say this to these kids. I was appalled that he would say this in the context of our traditional foods. We can think about all of the ways that, that foods are demonized, and particularly that a lot of our traditional foods are seen as somehow less than. And so I was appalled that his bias was getting in the way of our enjoyment of our traditional foods. And it also certainly hurt. It always hurts me personally when I hear fatness and fat people made fun of publicly. Although it does happen all the time. I don't feel like I've ever developed anything like a thick skin around it, nor do I feel like I should. Um, but the thing that also really was the catalyst and the spark for me in deciding that it was time for me to say something in the world, I didn't say anything in the moment, but to say something in the world, was that I also realized that this guy probably didn't know that Hanukkah is in fact a holiday that is a celebration of fat. That the reason that we eat fried foods on Hanukkah is because we celebrate fat as a symbol of our people's endurance in the face of hardship. And that's why we're doing that. And so that was the part for me that really made me realize that I had been internally sort of teaching myself and learning for myself a Torah of fat liberation, and that I hadn't really been sharing it with people, and that it was time to do that. So I started teaching and writing, and at the time I thought that I was quote unquote just writing a book. And so that took those whole 5 years, and I have in fact written a book, which I'll say more about at the end of our time together. But really, my aim has been to use Jewish tradition as a way to defend against anti-fat bias, and also as a really as a tool for celebrating and embracing bodies of every size. So that's a little bit about Fat Torah itself as a project. And I want to turn to this question of what it means to be a human being, how anti-fat bias causes the dehumanization of fat people, and how we can rehumanize ourselves. And to me, this feels like such an important way that we can learn something from the world of fat liberation. That's really so much an issue in so many areas, obviously, of our lives right now, this issue of not being able to see one another as human beings. And so I want to share my screen and tell you about a wonderful text that I love teaching. Let's see. Oh, wait, I have to go back here. Okay. Yes, I do want to share. Okay. So this is a whole set of texts that I love teaching about this question of a whole set of traditional Jewish texts that are wonderful for teaching about the divine image and human worth. And I'm just going to look at a couple of them with you because I know that our time is short. So I want to start by saying that I had this experience of having a fat activist online, not Jewish, and not religious as far as I know, ask people to share what their favorite fat liberation texts were. And I sort of cheekily, wrote in the Facebook comment, Genesis 1:26. And some people were offended that I would bring religion into such a space. But I really do feel like actually Genesis 1:27, right? This idea of every human being created in the image of the divine is really a core text in our tradition, and one that I certainly return to over and over again. And I'm going to skip ahead to a place in Mishnah, where, so this is right, third century CE, where um, we get a lot of wonderful ideas about what it means to be a human being. So I'm going to sort of read through this text and offer my commentary on it at the same time. And then I'm going to stop and see if anyone has questions about the text itself. And then we'll have more time for broader Q&A after that. Okay, here we go. So this is a text that's all that purports to be about capital cases, death penalty cases. So in the rabbinic tradition, the death penalty exists, although so people who are found guilty of murder are liable to the death penalty. However, it's very constrained by all kinds of factors. So the murder has to have been eyewitnessed by two people who not only saw it happen, but are willing to testify about it and are seen as witnesses who should be believed for all kinds of reasons. And in some parts of the tradition, it also says that those folks not only had to see this happen with their own eyes, the crime happen with their own eyes, but they had to warn the person committing the crime that what they were doing was wrong. Right, so you can see that the times when this would actually have been enacted would have been very rare, and that's oh yes, I'm happy to share this document with you. Let's see what the easiest way is for me to do that. Hold on, I'm gonna unshare the screen. Okay, I'm not sure why this is behaving this way. I have lost my Zoom controls.
Oh.
Okay, here we go. Okay. Um, I'm sure if I can share this with you easily.
It's possible there's like an add a file thing. If you go to the like in the chat box, see the um on the left in the box, the third little it looks like a piece of paper folded over, it says file.
Yeah,
If you click
okay.
on that, I think you could add it there.
It's not doing anything.
Oh.
Oh wait, hold on, hold on. No, it wants me to set up an integration, et cetera, et cetera. I
Oh.
don't think we really want to
Um,
see for that.
if you wanted to email it to me, I could try to get it in here for everybody if you wanted to be able to keep going or something. Then
Great.
yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, that's what I would like to do. Um, okay, hold on. Can you give me, yeah, you'll give me your email address?
Yep, sure. I just put it in the chat. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Great, thanks.
Thanks. Okay, now I have to figure out how to get back to Zoom. Okay. Okay, are we back to sharing my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Great, fantastic. Okay, where was I? So I just want to set this up for a minute. Okay, so we've already discussed as sort of a tangent, right, that death penalty cases didn't really happen very often. But one of the amazing things that we see in the chunk of Mishnah Sanhedrin that I'm about to go through with you is the way that the accused, right, the murderer in this case, um, is being held up as a human being created in the divine image. And the witnesses who are about to testify in the case, what's happening in this Mishnah is that they're being warned about the testimony that they're about to give. And they're being warned because the human being that they are testifying against is created in the image of the divine. So the question is, how do they admonish witnesses in capital cases? Okay, and I'm just going to skip a little bit. Okay, so this is where we get this idea that I'm highlighting it here, that one of the implications of being a human being is that anyone who causes a single life to perish, it's as if you've destroyed the whole world. And anyone who saves a single soul, it's as if you've saved the whole world. And so this is teaching, right, that every human being is unique and irreplaceable, right? That we cannot, that our human worth is immeasurable, right? It is literally infinite, that every human being is of infinite worth. So that's one piece of this. And then there's this beautiful story that some of you may have heard before, that the other reason that only, okay, that the other reason that we were created in this way, right? That the first human being was created and we're all created in that same image. It's this amazing story about how a human king can stamp out coins in the image of the king, right? You can imagine a coin with a king's image on it, and they all look the same. But the King of Kings, i.e., God, stamps out every human being with that original seal of the first human being, and none of us are like each other. Not one of them is like another. And what I love about this is that I think when we talk about being created in the divine image, we tend to think of it spiritually or metaphorically. And here it's really saying that this is really about the human form, that the diversity of human bodies is a sign of God's greatness in the world. Um, and it goes on to say that because of this, every single one of us is obligated to say, for my sake, the world was created. And I want to tell you why this idea of for my sake, the world was created has become so important to me in my work with Fat Torah. Before I even started teaching this text in this context, I was in an online community gathering for Fat Torah, and people were talking about physical accessibility of spaces for fat people. And one of the participants was talking about the challenge of, thanks, Bill. Do you want to say hello? This is my daughter who's coming to say hello. Do you want to sit here quietly? Okay. Okay. So she was talking about the challenge of, can you close the door, Bethel? Thanks. The challenge of just literally fitting in, right? Going to spaces and having a chair that would fit her, or going to spaces and being able to find clothing that would fit her. Please close this door, sweet love. Thanks. And she said that this world just wasn't made for us. And I love the fact that we have from our tradition, from our text, this idea that in fact the world is made for us, right? Human beings make choices about our spaces, but on this deep theological level, every single one of us is meant to be able to, and is obligated to say, for my sake, the world was created. I apologize because I need to switch once again to a different internet. If I disappear, I will return. Um, I think I'm back. So, um, so these are some of the texts that this is one of the texts that I love to teach about what it means to be human, right? So it means that we're each irreplaceable and unique. It means that our worth is infinite and immeasurable. And it means that every single one of us has a place in this world. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that fat people are dehumanized that really are reflective of, it's sort of like a mirror image of the ways that we ought to be treated as human beings. So every human being is unique, and yet fat people are often confused with one another, and people can't seem to tell us apart. So I have a wonderful classmate from rabbinical school who looks nothing like me. We're not even the same size or body shape. And we would have like professors thinking they had had a conversation with one of us when they had actually had a conversation with the other one. Right. So that is, to me, a great example of sort of dehumanization on that very fine grained level when you can't tell one of us apart from the other, even though every human being is unique. I had a similar incident happen in my neighborhood here in Jerusalem a couple of years ago, where a rabbinical student was visiting, and I was like showing her around, and I was so excited to have like another fat activist in the neighborhood for just at least a few weeks. And I'm showing her around, and we ran into a neighbor of ours, and and I start introducing myself. I start introducing her to my neighbor, and he says, "Oh, are you two sisters?" Like again, we look nothing alike. Like we both have brown hair and we're both fat. That was it. Um, so so that's just another example, right? If you can't tell one human being apart from the other, you're not honoring each of our uniqueness. Another way that we're dehumanized is that we're often depicted in media as what fat activist Charlotte Cooper calls headless fatties, right? So when there are stories about fatness in the media, in news media, we're often depicted like from the neck down. And so it's this amazing example to me of this idea that every human being, right, that God stamps out when God creates human beings in God's image, every one of us looks different. And all of these unique faces are just completely erased when we're depicted that way as headless fatties in media. So those are just a couple of examples, certainly from my own life and also from the media, of this dehumanization. And I think that we really have before all of us the challenge of what it means to rehumanize ourselves and one another, by honoring our uniqueness, by realizing that our worth is not measured. It's certainly not measured even by how healthy or unhealthy you think we are. One of the things that I love about this Mishnah Sanhedrin text is that, and we tend to gloss, I think most people, when they teach it about what it means to be created in the image of the divine, I think most people tend to gloss over the fact that the human being in question here is a murderer who two people at least have seen with their own eyes commit a murder. And that's the person who everyone is being reminded that that this person is created in the divine image. And it feels so important to me because I think for me, what that does is sort of bypass all of these questions about why people are fat, what we must have done wrong to get this way, right? All of these questions of blame and shame and assuming that there's some moral failure that goes into fatness. And rather than sort of getting into it with people about like, well, no, it's not my fault, it's this, it's that, right? I don't need to do any of that because the tradition to me teaches that that I am worthy of human dignity and respect, regardless of how I got to be who I am. Regardless of whether you think that I am murdering myself with my fatness, right? That even that human being is worthy of the same dignity and respect. So I'm going to pause there and have a look at the chat. You can put questions in the chat. You can also, I would love it if you would unmute yourself and I could hear your voices. I love that. Yes, seating. Okay, some comments about seating. All right, I am ready to take your questions. Anything that I said that was something you want to say something about, or if you have examples of your own that you would like to share.
Looks like Emmett has a raised hand.
Great. Yes, Emmett.
There you go.
Go ahead, Emmett.
This isn't really a question. It's more of a half-baked thought / association. I'm thinking of the studies about how when we design for the average, we are actually excluding the vast majority of humans. So thinking about I think the example I remember is Air Force pilots. They designed Air Force planes. I don't know if this was in the US or somewhere else, but they designed them for the average height man. And then basically no one could use the planes properly because it turns out that no one is exactly, well, I mean, some people are, but very few people are exactly the average height. And so what they learned is that you can't design for the average, you have to design for a range. You have to design so that it works for a range of people that includes the average. So I'm thinking very much about that and about how, as you're sharing the fact of the diversity of people's bodies and people's experiences in the world, like when we design for what we think is normal or what we think is average or prototypical, we're not just excluding people at the very tail ends of the distribution, although we are excluding those people. We're also excluding anyone who isn't in that very middle slot there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so short-sighted. So
Yeah.
that's just, those are the things that I've been thinking of while you've been talking. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think especially when it comes to, you know, issues of physical access, I think there has been also sort of a desire for universal design. But I think that it's very hard to actually make something universally accessible. So this is just a little example, right? But like, even if we're talking about seating, right? So often people of my size or larger, what I need is a seat that doesn't have arms. However, that only works for me because I'm someone who currently is able to sit down and stand up from a seat without needing arms to push off of. And that seat is not going to work for someone of any size who does need arms to push off of. So I think certainly when we think about sort of also diversity of design, that we need to think about, right, having, certainly if we're thinking about making our communities more welcoming, what it means to try and anticipate a diversity of needs. And absolutely that has to do with wanting to be able to welcome in a diversity of human beings. Yeah, thank you for that. Sharon Rubin, your hand is raised.
So I am anorexic, and I want to tell you that there is equal discrimination on that side of things as well. And I think that the issue is really about how do we change a culture that is so focused on body weight beauty, like all kinds of things that they sell to kind of convince people that that's where their self-worth comes. And I'm well-intended Torah learning people say really hurtful, dumb things about my being too thin, as well as I've heard people say things about, from their perception, people being too fat. So my question to you is, how do we, as a community in general, change the culture that we live in? Because that's where I think the core problem is personally.
Yeah, so I want to say a few things. Thank you, Sharon, for your vulnerable sharing on that. And I'm sorry that people say horrible things about your body. I do want to say that when we think about anti-fat bias in particular, it's important that we think about sort of different types of bias, and the kind of bias that you're referring to is one that I would call interpersonal bias, meaning that it's about things that people say to one another, and in this case, things that people say about one another's bodies. And it's absolutely the case that people in a relatively wide range of bodies can experience negative interpersonal interactions about the size of their bodies. My sense is that that tends to be that most of that tends to be rooted in anti-fat bias. I hear you that people say horrible things about thinness, and I'm not dismissing that you've experienced that. But most of our conversation, even when we're talking about thinness, tends to be rooted in in a bias against fatness. So that's interpersonal interactions. Another kind of anti-fat bias that absolutely people in a wide range of body sizes can experience is internalized anti-fatness, right? And that's where our own relationship with our body includes all kinds of negative ideas about our size. And absolutely, people who are dealing with disordered eating and with body dysmorphia are often dealing with their own internalized anti-fat bias. And I also want to a little bit gently push back on you saying that this just exists at all points in the size spectrum, because one kind of anti-fat bias that really only impacts people who are in larger bodies is systemic anti-fat bias. And what I mean by that is the ways that the fancy sociology word that we would use for that is life chances of fat people are impacted on a group level. So this is one that we can't usually measure around individuals, but that we can see in a group level. So this is things like the fact that there's a wage gap, meaning that fat people are paid less for the same work than our thin counterparts, just the way that there's a wage gap between men and women. That's something that only impacts people in larger bodies and doesn't actually impact people in smaller bodies. We also know that there's a huge amount of systemic anti-fat bias in medical settings, right, where doctors report spending less time with their fat patients than with their thinner patients. And they report, like they self-report, believing that their fat patients are non-compliant. So those are things that impact fat people on a systemic level, that are not the same as the very horrible things that individuals say to people in a wide range of bodies, or the very horrible relationships that any of us can have with our own bodies. And I think you're right that the question of sort of where change comes from, I mean, in a communal level, one thing I say when people ask me what we can do to sort of make to change the culture, I say, if you want to try just one thing that you can do, one thing that you can do is to stop complimenting weight loss. right? So this is sort of like a knee-jerk thing that everyone does. It's like part of our culture. And I think especially like in Jewish communities where, you know, like there's sort of some schmoozing time, and somehow like weight loss becomes like an appropriate topic to talk about at Kiddush. And the problem with complimenting weight loss is that you don't know, unless you know that person really well, you don't know why that person lost weight. You may, in fact, be complimenting an eating disorder. You may be complimenting someone who's lost weight because of grief or depression, or someone who's lost weight because of some disease process that you don't know about, that now you've sort of, you know, complimented on something that they didn't want to be complimented on. Even if someone wants to be complimented on their weight loss, the message that you're sending to everyone else who can hear you is that it's better to be fat, to be thin than to be fat. There's my own bias coming out. And the other thing that you're doing, because we know that intentional weight loss only works about 5% of the time, you're letting, so most people who have lost weight are going to regain that weight. You're letting that person know that you were judging them before they lost the weight. You were judging them more negatively than you do, and they can be sure that you will be judging them again in the very, very likely chance that they regain that weight. So that's my one little tip. That's not easy, but it is simple, which is to stop complimenting weight loss. Brian, you got your hand up.
So good to see you and learn with you, Minna. I
I'm so
love
glad
so
you're here.
much. Um, I think I've may have asked you this question before, like specifically, but in relation to other issues. Which is that, right? Like we can do our best, right, as individuals, as community leaders, as communities, as what have you. And yet, you know, going back to the story that you started with, it just takes one comment, right? It just takes one jerk to say
Yep.
the thing, right? And so I'm wondering, like, you know, in a way that I hope won't be like too painful for you to revisit, I'm wondering, like, just going back to that moment, like, what do you wish had happened? Both on like from, you know, a leader level, from a that person level, from a community response level, like, right? Like using that same very example, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like comebacks in the moment are really, really not my strong suit. Um, and I'm not sure kind of what's most kind of teachable in those kinds of moments. I think that, you know, we can, I think that we would do better to spend our energy on sort of, you know, broader education of and sort of unlearning for ourselves and for our communities. I think that also part of what's tricky is that when we set sort of rules about speech, we are changing sometimes the speech environment, but we're not necessarily changing what's actually sort of happening internally for people. So it can be very tricky. Fat Torah was very delighted to be invited a couple of months ago by Eden Village Camp. Um, Eden Village is a summer camp, and one of the things they do is that they have a no body talk policy. I think this has been good for a lot of people. From my perspective, that's really a stopgap. So we were invited to talk about no body talk, particularly because we had expressed concerns about whether it was really the best approach. And Eden Village, to their credit, really brought us in and invited us to do a whole session with them on why we thought no body talk was potentially problematic. And I think it can be a really, I think sort of setting like a community standard that no one talks about each other's bodies can be an important sort of stopgap or stepping stone. But you can hear in it that first of all, there may be things like why shouldn't we be able to talk about our own bodies and other people's bodies, right? Why can't we find ways to do that in ways that are uplifting rather than denigrating? And so it also, to me, can give the impression that there's something wrong with bodies. Like if we're sort of creating silence around bodies, is that kind of reinforcing a sense that maybe there's something that shouldn't be talked about bodies? So I think I don't have a good answer for you, but I think that trying to sort of come up with like with you know, comebacks in the moment or interventions in the moment is not not necessarily my strong suit. And I think that also that there can be a tendency, certainly in the fat liberation world, and I'd be curious to hear whether this is true in other activist spaces, to sort of feel like we ought to be better activists, right? Like we ought to be, we ought to talk back. And I think especially for those of us in marginalized identities, first of all, we're allowed to not have to be speaking up in every single context. And second of all, we need to take into consideration when speaking up could actually cause more harm to us. So this is particularly true, like in medical settings where there's a lot of language around like, well, here's how you should advocate for yourself. And I'm like, okay, I could advocate for myself, but actually I need to maintain this relationship with this particular physician because I don't have a choice about physicians. And so if not sort of being picky about how they talk about my body on a given day is going to help me maintain that relationship, then that's actually going to be better for me. And I don't need to sort of beat myself up about the fact that I like wasn't a good activist in that moment. So compassion is the answer. Okay. Heather. Wait, Katie and Heather. Sorry, Katie. And then Heather.
Oh,
Yes.
I was just going to say, I mean, I have found for me personally as like a protective thing and just for my sanity, I usually just don't acknowledge comments about weight or food. If somebody says something to me, I'll change the subject. And usually it just, for the most part, gives the message that this is not something I'm going to engage in and talk about, and people stop doing it. And then, of course, like with my close friends, I'm more like, they know how I feel about things. But yeah, because it's true that like I feel like just a common small talk that really bothers me. Like people make comments, I'm so bad for eating this muffin or something um in the staff kitchen. It's just like these are things that come up so naturally for people, and so I just don't engage with them.
Yeah. Yep. I think sort of silence or like still face can be a very powerful message when people say something. Heather, let me hear you.
Hi, this is kind of off topic, but I love all the science going on in your top or dress, and I'm terribly curious where it's from.
It's not off topic at all because accessibility in clothing is a genuine issue. This dress, thank you. I don't know if all of you can see the pattern is called something STEM, and it has all kinds of scientific formulas and DNA, etc. It's from a company called Princess Awesome, and they make this dress in my size down to toddler size. And it's a really fun company that has some extended sizes, not unlimited, but
Awesome,
certainly
thank
for
you.
yeah, yep, absolutely. Okay, we don't have. Are we meant to be ending in 1 minute? Is that true, Irina?
That's like you can, but we've also had a lot of people go all the way to the hour or shortly before that.
Okay.
So
Okay. Okay, great. I'm gonna have a quick look just to see if there's anything in the chat that I want to talk about. Oh my gosh, you've got such great things that you're talking about here, but okay. Yes. Someone said something about asking for seatbelt extenders on an airplane, and I just want to say you could just ask for it without feeling any shame. You could just ask for it, which of course can be a tall order. Okay. So I want to thank you all for being here with me and for listening and for contributing. And sorry, I'm just like looking at the chat. I'm not necessarily the best multitasker. Okay. So yeah, so thanks for being with me. It's really a big joy of mine to be able to share my own love of my body and of fatness more broadly, and also to offer us this opportunity to think about the ways that we dehumanize ourselves and others by not recognizing each of our uniqueness and irreplaceability and immeasurable value. And to give us a sense that our tradition can be a source of rehumanizing ourselves, and finding ways to see the humanity within ourselves and within all of us. And I want to take this moment to Sharon, you didn't offend anyone. I'm so glad that you shared vulnerably with us. Okay, one sec. So, I want to share with you another image. If this will let me. Oh, come on, computer, you can do it. Okay, here we go. We're going back to this, but then I want to share with you the book cover for my book that's coming out in September. It's called Everybody Beloved, A Jewish Embrace of Fatness. And it's available for pre-order. And I'm going to put the pre-order link in our Zoom chat.
Were you trying to show the cover though? I just want to tell you the cover is not showing. So we're
cover's
still
not
looking
showing.
at
How
the
come?
PDF that you had before.
Oh no. How about now?
There we go.
There it is. All right. So that is available here. No, I don't want that to do that. Thank you. It is a gorgeous cover, isn't it? I'll also share Cat Max is the name of the artist of the original piece. And there is the link. So thanks again. You can find me online if you have any other questions about this, or if you want to connect more about any of this work. And I hope you've had a wonderful, wonderful Shavuot. And it's been a real delight to be with you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Minna. That was a great session.